We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I thank you. And we will have public comment. Does anyone wish to address the Executive Committee on a public comment? No one approached me, and no one has approached the clerk. So we will move on to approval of the Executive Committee meeting minutes of August 11th, 2022. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Mask. Any discussion on the minutes? Any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the Executive Committee meeting minutes of August 11th, 2022, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion is carried. Thank you. We go down to item number 5, educational presentation and committee discussion. And we will start with item number 5A, and that's the process for Marathon County Board and Committee meeting minutes. And there was a request by a supervisor that that we get more detail and have much more detail in our meeting minutes. And I know we've had this discussion multiple times. It's revolved around several Okay, I apologize. So we've had various discussions, various times about what should be in the minutes. I will allow the Corp Counsel and Administrator Leonard to give us a little bit of a background on where we're at, and then I will follow up with where WCA's position is on minutes of meetings. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Chair Gibbs, I think, provided enough of a background. This has been a topic of conversation since I came into administration 6 years ago, and part of that conversation has always been around the various entities we have being responsible for minutes. So for those individuals that have been on the board for a while, you know that we've historically had standing committees that had minutes taken by multiple different departments. County administration used to be involved in taking minutes. Statutorily, the clerk has the responsibility for taking county board and committee meeting minutes. We have transitioned to that to add some consistency. Environmental Resources is still the committee that, based on their specific duties and the specific nature of some of their minutes relative to public hearings, that's still done by Conservation, Planning, and Zoning. But the topic of minutes and what really should be in minutes has been something that I have sat through a great many committee meetings and board meetings where that has been a topic. So kind of where we are at this specific point is, as Chair Gibbs referenced, my recollection of the conversations, and I certainly would invite other members of the board to supplement kind of the history I'm providing. My recollection was that the decision of the board was to move to a more consistent approach for all of the standing committees, really other than ERC, to be more in line with what is required by Robert's Rules of Order and what is the guidance of the Wisconsin Counties Association, as well as making sure we're in compliance with Wisconsin's open meetings law. So what does that mean? Specifically within Roberts, and I know Corp Counsel Purner is appearing virtually today, and he can supplement anything I'm going to say or correct it. Either one would be appropriate, of course. But under Roberts, it's really important to capture within minutes the individual making the motion, the individual making the second, and the result of the determination of the body. So we certainly do that through our minutes. The guidance from Wisconsin Counties Association, and I'm certainly not going to read anything that they've put out, but I'll provide my interpretation of it, and that is that minutes are not a verbatim or comprehensive collection of the or summary of the discussion that was had. So we've really tried to move in that direction. And I can tell you that I do recall being part of discussions where individuals would pull up the meeting minutes and say, well, I didn't exactly say that. I said something else. So there was this direction to go to a more generalized meeting minute process. So we have done that. The other thing I'll offer, and this is my recollection, is that last term of the board, there was a desire to expand our use, the board's use of the Wisconsin access media, the recording and broadcast of and continued posting of our meetings, the standing committee meetings on the Marathon County YouTube channel, and utilizing public access to do that. And one of the reasons was to provide greater access to supervisors who were interested in a particular topic on an agenda to actually go back and view either in real time when the meeting was happening, they can ask to be included through a meeting invitation, or watch that meeting discussion at a later date. So that's kind of how we've gotten to this point. And again, we've moved from administration being responsible for a number of those standing committees to the clerk being responsible for not only the board, but also all the standing committees of the board, except for environmental resources. So I don't know, Corp Counsel Purner, if I've missed anything, or Chair, if there's anything else from the Wisconsin Counties Association you'd like to offer, but that's just my general recollection of the discussion and kind of the thought process behind where the board has directed staff to proceed.
So, Michael, anything to add?
Can you hear me, Chair Gibbs?
Yes, we can. Now I can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. No, Lance really encapsulated what I would have said. Statutorily, really the only requirement is that minutes be taken, but further definition of what that means is not anywhere in Wisconsin statute. Robert's Rules does have the elements of what minutes should be, which really includes if there's a motion, what the motion was, who made it, what the second was, and then what the vote was on the motion. And the minutes otherwise just have to give a general idea of what occurred at that meeting. So those are the only legal guidelines, I think, that are really spelled out and applicable.
And Wisconsin, thank you, Michael. So Wisconsin Counties Association has ruled that, not ruled, has come out and taken a position that when you start to try to capture verbatim discussion, it leads to, and sometimes, misquoting, misunderstanding, and challenges to what's in the minutes. And so their position has always been, you need to record who's making the motion, who has made the second, how the vote turned out, and that there was discussion that was had. It does not get into recording the discussion or trying to. Again, this body has had discussions over the term that I've been on this board that they wanted more detail in the minutes. Well, that led to more discussion about the minutes and more. When we moved towards recording them, we said that would facilitate and allow individuals to go back and view any discussion that was had, and the minutes would be uniform by the clerk. So with that, is there any further discussion by the committee or comments from the executive committee? Supervisor Robinson.
I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we are recording all of our standing committees and making that available to the public as a way for both increased transparency and avoiding, I think, misinterpretation or misstruing of what the intent of a person is. And I think that's a far better way of providing the public with information. And I think people are generally looking for what was the outcome of the meeting. And I think we're trying to capture that with our current process.
Supervisor Marash.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I'm the one that brought up the meeting minutes, so that's why I have a comment. Being new to the board and just reading the minutes over, I do clearly appreciate having everything recorded, and I do watch all the committee meetings and take notes, etc. But for other people that may not have the time to watch all of the committee meetings and just reviewing the minutes themselves, having just questions asked and answered and discussion was had may not be enough. I'm not looking for anything verbatim. Definitely not. That's too much. It was just more of a high level what question was asked, and then people would know what to look for in the recording instead of having to watch something that's an hour and a half to 2 hours long, which some of them are. So that's where the question came from. Thank you.
And thank you for that clarification. And yet it's still, the challenge is still stems around once you start to put in comments or discussion or even questions that were asked and answered, then when that comes about in the meeting minutes, then people start to say, well, I didn't say that or I didn't mean that. And that's where the challenge becomes or comes to light, at least when adopting those minutes. It's up to the will of this committee. But again, I think what we have moved to is something more in clarity. And it provides the ability. I know that that's a little bit challenging sometimes when people want to get to a specific topic and understand the specific discussion. But like I said, if they have that interest, I think they need to look at the actual discussion. Supervisor Mask.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I put my iPad on my island counter when I'm cooking, and I can fast forward through the meetings to the point that I missed or that I wouldn't want to hear the discussion. I've done that with Health and Human Services. It's a little tricky getting to that point, but if you follow the agenda, you can get there. So you don't have to listen to everything. So I found it to be very helpful, but I like to multitask, so while I'm slicing and dicing, I listen.
Other discussion? Go ahead, Supervisor.
If we're giving out tips about YouTube, you can also change the speed that you wish to listen to something so you can listen to it as a faster speed so you don't have to listen to us speak for 2 hours.
Sometimes that makes people sound better, especially me. Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to address something that Supervisor Marash brought up in her comment, which is if people are having a hard time getting to the part of the meeting that they wish to view as far as the discussion, I mean, wouldn't a simple fix be marking down the meeting minute time of when a particular agenda item gets brought up, include that in the YouTube description? I mean, that's not even asking that much more of the video recording staff.
The only challenge that I have there is if the time ends up being wrong and then somebody comes back and says, well, the meeting minutes said it started at 13:02, 1:02, and it didn't start till 1:04. Now the meeting's minutes are inaccurate and somebody could challenge it. I understand the thought, but I can tell you I have seen people will nitpick and say that the minutes are inaccurate then. Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A follow-up. I think you might misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm saying that when the YouTube video is posted to YouTube, there's always a description included. And within that description, you could write the minute mark of when a particular agenda item is considered. So from there, if they have, let's say it's agenda item, I don't know, 5A, the one we're talking about right now, you could mark that discussion began at the 5-6 minute mark, include that in description. That way, all they would have to do is look for the description when they pull up the YouTube video.
The administrator would like to address that.
I can follow up with Wisconsin Access Media or Wausau Area Media Services to figure out their ability to do that. I think that's a great idea, to have them flag the times. I know they do minutes for the city of Wausau as well, and I would imagine that the city might prefer to have a similar feature added. So I'll follow up and I'll bring information back to the committee. We do have an annual contract that I work through with that entity, so we, if nothing else, we can add that to the contract.
Okay, I was misunderstanding I was understanding that you wanted it in the minutes of the, perfect. Other discussion? Go ahead, Supervisor.
I would agree with Supervisor Marash that it can be difficult to follow along, so to speak, with the minutes as to what happened in the meeting. But I do agree that to detail all of that would be quite a task, and that's not really the intent of minutes. So I like a general description, and we have that in some of our committees, and I think that idea, you can at least get the flavor for some of the things that were brought up. I will add one additional thing, and this has come up in another setting, and that is the idea of draft minutes being posted before they're approved. And I don't know, we really don't have like a policy for that. So if a meeting happened on, last week, I think public safety was the one I was looking at, there's the minutes that are posted so people can see, but there's an indication that it's not approved, and I don't know if that is an issue at all.
Administrator and then Supervisor Robinson.
So I think the question inherent, if we can do a better job of flagging whether they're draft, I think we used to put a watermark on. I don't know if that's still happening, but I can talk to Kim about it. But when we had rules review in the last iteration, my recollection was that one of the things that that committee wanted was the minutes being included in the board packet for the standing committee meetings that preceded the board, so that when items were coming up for board action, they could go back and see the action that was taken at the committee level. But if it's something as simple as, I think what you're saying, Supervisor, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is to have a designation, at least on those draft committee meeting minutes that are in the county board packet, they are draft. We can certainly do that. And I think we have.
Put a cover page before them that says draft minutes, but each individual minutes is not watermarked.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Supervisor Robinson.
That was my proposal to do that, because there were so many times where the minutes were, and particularly now, we're kind of structuring everything so it flows up to the county board meeting. And in the past, we never had the minutes before the county board meeting, and that was an effort to try to get them out there, even as draft, to the county board for your ability to review, to get a better flavor of what went on at the meeting. And now we're doing that. But the intent was, again, to increase transparency and provide more information to the county board before the action occurred at the county level. And rarely do we change the minutes, and usually it's more of an editorial change between the draft and the final. But that was the rationale.
Supervisor Longenhan, please.
Very quickly, I just looked at the July packet for the county board meeting for the Thursday night educational meeting. And it's interesting because if you look at the ERC minutes, the first page of that section has draft watermarked on it, but the preceding minutes before it, public safety doesn't have draft on it, and they met within the same month, so it's not that they already approved those. So maybe it's something just to address consistency within the packet.
Okay. Supervisor Van Cray.
Just to go along with this, it does look like the Public Safety Committee meeting minutes are on the website posted already, and it does not indicate that they're a draft. So I think that's probably what you were referencing.
Clerk.
It's been in our workflow that as soon as the staff member has the meeting minutes done, to put them on, to get them on the website right away. Otherwise, if you wait and come back to it, sometimes it gets lost. But we can certainly add to put that draft watermark on our minutes before they get posted. That's not a problem.
The challenge is going to also be once they get approved, to go back and change them from draft to adopted. So we need to be clear that, that they no longer are a draft once the committee's approved them. Any other discussion? Okay, we will move on. Any updates by standing committee chairs? Supervisor Robinson.
So I want to just update you, the committee, the hardest working committee. I'm waiting for eye contact from. Is in the process of developing a work plan, and we've targeted tax increment financing review, the American Rescue Plan Act, property management issues relative to tax delinquency, surplus property, and others, and then cultural competence consistent with the county board rules and that whole issue of how do we make it ourselves a better, more attractive workplace and more inclusive in our recruiting. So we will be finalizing that work plan. At the last meeting, we spent time looking at how do we have designated or earmarked internally money for broadband with the use of the American Rescue Plan Act, approximately $3.9 million. We haven't formally taken that to the county board. And that earmark was based upon the commitments that we made in March to Frontier, Serenity, and Bug Tussle relative to their proposals before the Public Service Commission. Part of that was a $3 million loan to Bug Tussle, and we adopted a grant program, a reimbursable grant program where we would pay $235 per unit served to them. So Bug Tussle would be entitled to approximately just under $1 million or $150,000. But then they're looking for a $3 million loan, and we're looking at how do we fund that. We can't use ARPA dollars for that, so we're looking at the possibility of using fund balance consistent with the terms that we used with the agreement that we had last fall with Bug Tussle with that conduit borrowing. So we're going to model that after that, but that will be coming to the county board. And then Serenity was not funded, and we still have the commitment to Frontier, so we'll be bringing that in. We are also working on the capital improvement plan. We received the initial report on the request of approximately $25.5 million dealing with end-of-life compliance projects, new projects, and recurring costs. We'll be bringing that to the county board later this month for an update. And then under budget assumptions, we talked about health insurance at our early meeting. We authorized the staff to pursue self-insurance options, and a report was brought back to us from an educational perspective that as a result of that action, they went back to group health insurance and had discussions about the 8% increase in health insurance costs, and that was lowered, I thought initially to 5%, but now to 3.9%. So the issue of pursuing self-insurance at this time was delayed because of the workload and other concerns, but we'll continue to monitor that going forward. And then the other budget assumption was we didn't build in the fact that North Central Healthcare does not have the revenue right now to pay off this and next year's obligations relative to the borrowing that we did with them. They will continue to owe them, but we'll need to fund that through the county's reserves, and we're building that into our budget debate or discussion.
Okay, any other, Supervisor Langenhan? Any other discussions by committee chairs? I thought you raised your hand. I apologize.
No, but if you'd like an update from the ERC, you can read the meeting minutes or watch the YouTube video.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Or I can watch the video. Any other announcements or updates by standing committee chairs? Supervisor Dickinson, please.
I just had one question. So HR Finance is developing a work plan, you stated. Does that require any executive committee approval or full board approval? Or does that committee just decide they want to do a work plan on their own terms?
We did this last session where we looked at the issues that were facing us. It's an effort. a lot of, we have a few responsibilities, but some of them are sort of those custodial and operational, where we review claims, budgeting, and other things that are spelled out. But then we get into policy issues in discussions. For instance, on the tax delinquent property, one of the concerns was the significant number of delinquent properties where we hadn't pursued the tax deed process, and with some changes in the law, we wanted to take the second meeting of the month, which is more of an educational meeting, and focus the efforts on trying to resolve some of those issues. We don't have currently a policy on how do we deal with our surplus property if social services becomes vacated, if River Drive becomes vacated, with our other parcels across the county, how do we address those? So we have developed our own work plan internally, understanding that anything we need to do from a policy perspective will go to the county board, but it's to direct staff resources and committee efforts to try to identify those as priority items where we will spend our committee time. But it's consistent with what we had done 2 years before.
Yeah, and the board rules are silent to whether or not a work plan can be developed by a committee, understanding that it's purview, or it's limited to the scope of which that committee has jurisdiction, and with the full understanding that any policy change has to come to the full board for approval. Supervisor Dickinson.
So just as a follow-up, you had mentioned cultural competence, and I assume that's under the HR banner. And you mentioned some other things as far as recruiting, et cetera. So the implementation of meeting a goal of cultural competence, who does that lie with? Is it HR Finance is saying we want to do this because we created a work plan, and then administration says, hey, we can do that, and then administration says these are the things we want to do, and it just gets done, and then the full board itself or the executive committee never really sees that work? Is that, or you understand what I'm asking? Thank you.
That heading really captures, if you recall, when we adopted the rules of the county board, we abolished the Diversity Affairs Commission, and we gave to each of the standing committees responsibilities relative to the activities that were performed by the Diversity Affairs Committee, and you and I had worked on the actual language. It's to look at that issue and to build that into what we do as a committee. So the intent was to follow the rules, use that as the driver. We captured under the broader heading, whether it's appropriate or not, under cultural competence is just a broad flagship, but it's the intent to follow through what we had talked about in the adoption of the rules.
Supervisor Dickinson, go ahead.
Just the last point on that. So infrastructure has those rules as well, and then we help work with getting broadband throughout the county, and then the board actually votes on that. They make a decision because there's a monetary reason to. That's where I'm kind of going with that. Although the responsibility falls under that committee, there's at what point is there a review of those actions being taken, and how do we have insight into what that is? Because I don't know. I'm trying to find at what point do we get involved with what information is being disseminated about cultural competence, similar to the discussion of what kind of books are in the library, right? It's a similar, it's a little bit distant there because the library board has a more separate kind of statutory setup. But I hope you understand, the delicate nature of what I'm trying to ask the question. But how far do we get involved in understanding what HR Finance is doing under cultural competence?
Any thoughts?
Some people are looking at me, so I don't know if that means I have to talk. I'll interpret the question, what does it mean from the administration lens? And I guess I haven't been asked as your administrator by the HR Finance and Property Committee to do anything. So my answer is going to be the lawyer answer that I think Mike gave when there were questions asked during orientation. And my response is, it depends. So if there is a request for a program to be started and it's not an existing activity, it would, in my mind, probably take funding to do that, and that is going to require an allocation from the board. I'll give you an example that the board authorized about 6 years ago, I think, the use of we closed to the public in the middle of January to do an all-staff training day on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, when most government, state government, federal government's already closed. We're open, of course, for all of our emergency functions. We continue to deliver those services, but we do close a number of our non-emergency departments to the public. We continue to work. It's not a day off, as the day off exists for state employees, but we utilize that to make sure we provide mandated trainings, ensure staff competencies. That was approved by the board. So depending on what the request was from HR Finance, I certainly think, to your point, Supervisor Dickinson, there's county board review. But at this point, I haven't been asked to do anything. I think it's as I understand the work plan that is going to be drafted, it's a tool to aid committee discussion, kind of like your county board calendar and the calendar that HR Finance adopted for budget review. There are certain steps to that budget adoption process that were in the HR Finance and Property Committee packet. That's how I've interpreted what their work plan has been, but I hesitate to take a very defined response because I haven't been asked to do anything.
And my take on it would be, unless there was resources that are reallocated, I mean, the discussion can take place, but just until there's resources reallocated, the full board, there wouldn't necessitate action by the full board unless resources are reallocated. Supervisor Robinson.
Let me just revisit the rule, because the rule says promote cultural competence in county employment policies and in the design and delivery of county programs and services. We took the cultural competency out of the rule language as a way to summarize it, not be fully descriptive. So again, it was promote cultural competence in county employment policies and in the design and delivery of county programs and services. That's what we're intending to capture in that.
Other discussion, any other discussion? Updates by any other standing committee chairs? Okay, we will move on. Policy issue, operational functions required by statute, ordinance, or resolution, none. Moving on to item number 7, policy issue for discussion and possible action. A discussion on the strategic plan updates from the standing committees and possible recommendations to the full board. Again, this was my take initially. What I had understood was that 3 committees, technically 4 committees, have completed their work on the strategic plan updates and their recommendations. This committee, the executive committee, is in charge of the strategic plan. And so I wanted to have a review, and so I split it apart, and 3 committees are on the agenda for discussion on their updates and our recommendations effectively to the full board on their recommendations. Then next month, if the other 2 committees that haven't completed their work finish their work, we'll have their discussion on their updates next month. But to split it apart, I brought in, again, 3 committees with their updates. Infrastructure Committee, Health and Human Services Committee, Extension, Education, Economic Development Committee, and their recommended updates to the strategic plan. So I throw it out for discussion, and we can start by any committee. With Vice Chair McEwen, who is in charge of the strategic plan, I will hand it over to him, and also in charge of infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Infrastructure Committee worked on these changes for probably the last 3 meetings, and we were able to come up with our recommendations. And the Infrastructure Committee is designated as a lead committee jointly with 8.7. So that was the first one that's in your packet that we dealt with. And that's to strive to provide affordable, reliable, high-speed internet throughout the county. That objective was acceptable. We didn't change anything as far as wording on that. However, we started with the strategies, and the strategy A that's in the current strategic plan, we deemed that strategy as being complete, but we did modify strategy A, and we have in there A1, and I don't know how it's going to be exactly listed in the new strategic plan, but strategy A1, which is listed in there, we reworded that to support broadband task force in executing continued comprehensive approach to delivering countywide high-speed internet access with a particular focus on addressing the unserved and the underserved areas. Because at this point, they felt that the broadband task force has completed the original strategy A, but we want to continue to support the broadband task force with continuing moving forward. As far as strategy B, we struck the last two words, which is through McDevco. The only reason we did that is not anything because of McDevco, but we felt that it should be providers and government, and it could be McDevco or any other government agency that would work with providing the service. So that one would be left the same minus the through McDevco on the bottom of it. C, there was just one modification with that, and the original one says develop financial incentives to encourage carriers/providers to commit to helping accomplish this objective in Marathon County. We took out the word financial, the second word, so the strategy C would be read without that financial word in there. As far as D, we made no changes to that one, which is establish a Dig One policy for county roadway reconstruction of bridges projects that engage providers in discussions with whether to include a conduit for fiber. Moving on to strategy E, we modified that and to read assist Marathon County citizens in providing information regarding available carriers within their general area of the county. So are there any questions on the five strategies?
Questions for Vice Chair McEwen, Chair of Infrastructure, on the proposed changes and strategies for 8.7?
Okay, thank you. Then I'll move down to the outcome measures. There's one outcome measure. There's one outcome measure in 8.7, and we deemed that outcome measure completed as currently drafted. But we did add two other outcome measures. And the first one reads by December 31st, and it's 2024. It's not 2,224, but it's 2024. Develops an improved data inventory relative to internet service speeds available through the county. And then the second outcome measure would be by December 31st, 2023, ensure 85% of households have access to high-speed internet with 50 up and 10 down. So that's the changes that we made to 8.7. Are there any questions on the outcome measures?
Questions on 8.7's outcome measures? Supervisor Robinson.
Craig, I believe that the intent, the committee talked about having by December 24th, 2022,
Yeah, that's correct.
the data.
Yeah.
So
I apologize.
no, the 4. We talked about 4, but then we said we thought we could do it sooner, so we were going to target this year.
Yeah, you're correct. I do. We first discussed 2023, and then with discussion, we did change it to 2022. So thank you for catching that.
So the first point would read just by December 31st, 2022, develop a approved data inventory?
No, the second the second outcome measure by December 31st.
5% of.
Oh, the first one, the 8.
That was 2020. I thought we left that at 2024. Maybe I was, so where's those minutes?
I think this one it was originally the discussion was originally to make it 2024, which is why it was in red. And we were tracking changes, but then the discussion was to make it 2022. So the long line, when you do
Underneath
track
it.
changes, goes right through where the 4 runs across. So it's,
I
so
see.
I
Okay.
believe Supervisor Robinson is correct.
Okay.
That it wanted to end up by December 31st,
Okay, you're
2022.
correct.
I apologize that, again, that track changes is tough on that one because
That's okay. But thank you for clarifying that. And thank you Supervisor Robinson for, I know we discussed it, and like I said, I just didn't have the minutes in front of me. So so that would be the only change from what I reported. Is there any other changes or on 8.7? Okay. The second committee, or the second objective that infrastructure is the lead committee on is 10.12, and the objectives to maintain infrastructure to support economic growth. We did not have any changes for wording on that. That was acceptable. There are, as far as strategy A, we made no changes to that. We left that as worded. As far as strategy B, we modified it to provide as follows: support technology in the workforce and at the home, particularly through access through broadband. So we would keep B, but just reword it as stated in there. Moving on to strategy C, after discussion, we decided to eliminate this strategy as the committee expressed that this is not viewed as a primary function of county government, but rather obligations of municipalities. So C would be removed. As far as D, strategy D, there were no changes to that. Strategy E, that was also, after the discussion, we made a recommendation to eliminate strategy E, and the committee viewed this as a primary function of municipalities as opposed to county government. Moving on to F, we made some modifications to F, and then the modification in the minutes are in the packet here. Secure state and federal funding to maintain and or develop infrastructure, including multimodal transportation features and support economic growth. So that was modified. Then we came up with a new strategy. We're calling it strategy G, maintain and update county highway safety plan. And the last strategy, we added another strategy, which is strategy A, which is actually out of the comp plan and part of 10.13, which is in the comp plan. It's on page, where do we add that? Page 164 of the big book of the comp plan. So we're asking to have that added as a strategy. There are two outcome measures in 10.12. Outcome measure, we had no suggestions for any changes. However, outcome measure number 2 eliminated, we're recommending to eliminate it as drafted and replace with 2 following measures. So there would be the first, which would be now number 2 if we eliminate the first number 2. The number 2 outcome measure would be implement at least 3 federal highway administrative safety plan countermeasures based on information from the 2021 Marathon County Roadway Safety Plan or its successors on an annual basis. then which would be outcome measure 3, staff reports to infrastructure committee relative to feedback from municipal leaders elected or appointed on safety concerns on the county highways and multimodal transportation system following the quarterly safety meetings. So that is our recommendation for changes on 8.7 and 10.12. Is there any questions about 10.12?
Just a question, when eliminate, and why does the committee feel that eliminating strategy E is only a municipality responsibility when there's effectively property out there that's tax delinquent, that is contaminated, that we, in some cases, have chosen not to take at this point because of the contamination? So that's, I guess, the question that I would have and pose to the committee. I'm not sure that they understand that there's property that the county may be in inventory of that potentially is contaminated, that would need special federal funding to clean up, to be able to be reintroduced into the tax base in the county.
Well, that's a very good question. I guess.
I guess that was what when that strategy was put in there, was targeting was property that clearly has contamination on, that is delinquent, that the municipality wants nothing to do with, and so it still sits on the tax rolls. We're still settling it. And yet, so why wouldn't we want to pursue funding to clean it up so that we could put it back on the tax rolls where we're not settling with the municipalities and the school districts for property that's still being taxed at full rate? That's the question I have. Supervisor Dickinson.
So I guess my question would be, what have we done for that strategy since it was created? Do we have a countywide revolving loan fund, as this suggests we have? Because if we have a strategy and we haven't done anything on it in several years, I guess I would question why we have it. It's not getting worked on. So is it getting worked on?
I can.
Administrator Leonard, please.
My understanding from an administration and county staff perspective, I believe you're right. It is not. I would defer to members of the committee that have perhaps a longer history of the county's strategy with respect to specific parcels. I believe we have pursued funding for specific parcels in partnership with municipalities to clean up specific properties. But to your question and the specific strategy of putting together a countywide revolving loan fund, I'm not aware that we've done anything. I will say, I believe I shared at Extension, Education, Economic Development, a strategy that has been used in another county to address blight, and specifically I'm talking about La Crosse County. They did create, as I understand it, a fund to which applications can be made to address blight. So I brought that up, I believe, in connection with the housing discussion that committee was having as just an example of strategies being used in other counties that I'm aware of. But to your targeted question of have we done anything on that, I don't believe so, Supervisor Dickinson. I certainly don't know of a countywide revolving loan fund or a fund that we hold with McDevco that's been utilized for that purpose. But I can say to Chair Gibbs' point, I'm aware of at least one property that is currently delinquent that has significant environmental concerns that, as of right now, the county has chosen not to take because of those concerns.
Supervisor Van Cray and then Vice Chair McCune.
Can I just ask logistically, what are we doing today? Are we going to be making any decisions on this as a body, or will it wait until we've seen the other two committees and then we'll follow through? Is it appropriate that we make changes to this? Should the changes go before the full board? Do they have to go back to committee? All of those questions.
Compound question, foul.
Yes.
Take the lead from the administrator. The thought was that we would have discussion and recommendation and possibly vote on the changes and then provide that feedback to the standing committee if we so desire. But this committee is committee of jurisdiction to the full board. So it's yeah. So I don't have a answer for the process as to whether or not it actually goes back to the standing committee, but it is ultimately the committee of jurisdiction is this committee, executive committee.
Thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going down the same lines as Supervisor Van Cree. I certainly appreciate recommendations, and if there's, if you have another change, like I said, and as Supervisor Dickinson pointed up, there hasn't been any movement on this strategy. We haven't. So, is there another way it can be reworded instead of eliminating it? Or, like I said, I'm open to suggestions. That was the committee's wishes, and like I said, if there's any, keep it in there and reword it. I'm not sure, but have a policy on developing a revolving loan fund or something similar to that. If, like I said, if we're not doing it.
My thought is that we have, we reword it. If we're not going to develop a loan fund, but we have a process by which we determine property that needs to be cleaned up, and we pursue funding to assist in that cleanup to be able to put it back on the property tax rolls, we should have that policy defined. I got Supervisor Dickinson.
I guess in that regard, from the infrastructure perspective, I wouldn't see that this strategy would be within our objective. It would seem perhaps it's economic development, or maybe it's something more environmental. It doesn't quite fit, in my opinion, with infrastructure. So perhaps the recommendation is to move it for another committee to look at.
Supervisor Robinson.
Just to try to provide some clarification, I'm not sure that the county is in the position of creating the revolving loan fund. The state, there are a number of funding pots that are available for dealing with contaminated properties. One is the EPA Brownfield program, and which is a grant, and there's also monies that flow through the state where Department of Natural Resources Remediation Redevelopment Program, where there are loans and grants that are made to communities. I'm not sure that the county would be involved in the creation of the revolving loan program. We may assist in the securing of funding through revolving loan programs or grants to clean up those properties, but I think it's probably more under the purview of the Environmental Resources Committee, potentially if it's an environmental issue or economic development from the perspective of the Weisenberger property in Marathon City. But I'm not sure that it's an infrastructure committee lead consistent with Supervisor Dickinson's perspective. Perhaps instead of eliminating, we could just assist in the obtaining of funding, grants, and loans for the purposes of cleaning up contaminated property for redevelopment.
Yeah, when eliminating it, I wasn't commenting on where it's appropriate, whether it's appropriate in infrastructure. I just think that if we're not going to focus on it, then it's not going to get done. And that's what the strategic plan is designed to do, is put focus on areas that need attention. So.
That's what I was thinking. But it's, like I said, I'm glad we're having a discussion because, like I said, these were recommendations. And if there's, if we can improve them or come up with different recommendations, that's what we're supposed to be doing, I think. So like I said, that's why we eliminated, we didn't feel it was in the, fall into the jurisdiction of infrastructure. But
So then should the recommendation be to move it and the recommended changes to a different committee, to EEDC, under their purview? I throw it out for discussion. Supervisor Langenau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's really hard to understand this strategy when, based on the discussion that I'm hearing right now, that there seems to be a lack of history behind it as far as context of what the goal is. The other concern I have is that if the county was to secure some sort of grant funding from the feds or the state, and then they would become responsible for administering that funding to the local governments, I mean, that just puts more of a strain on resources. And I know you had mentioned this earlier, but shouldn't there be more of a direct connection between those local governments and the state and the federal government? I don't know why the county would have to be responsible for administering that.
Well, if the county, the county is right now out to finances because the property is delinquent. We haven't taken it. And yet we're still settling on the property tax to the municipality and to the town. And we continue to do so. So until somebody makes movement to actually clean the property up and bring it back into the tax rolls, the county's out tax money. That's the point that I was trying to make.
So is the town, the village, the city, the tech school, all them others too.
Correct, absolutely. They're made whole. We are not.
Okay.
We are not. The county is paying out to the municipality, whether it be town, county, or town, city, village. The county is paying out to the school district. The county is paying out to the tech, and the county is paying out to the state. The money that the county doesn't effectively receive for the county's portion, we're out that also because we didn't get it. So we're out the full property tax that was levied against the property.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think Supervisor Langenau had a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer it, but I'll do my best to get the historical piece, the kind of context. The reason it's in Objective 10.12 is because that was a comp plan strategy approved in 2016 that fell under that kind of category of maintaining infrastructure to support economic growth. I think what I'm hearing is, does it really fit there, or perhaps is it better characterized under a different heading under the economic development goal within the comp plan? And I think that's a great discussion. I do have an underlying question that I think I'll work with Corp Counsel after, which is, can we do that? Can we utilize federal and state resources to create a revolving loan fund? And when I hear revolving loan fund, that's non-property specific to me, as opposed to my understanding of how this normally works is you identify the property, a specific property, and you then pursue state and federal funding for that property.
Yep.
It does beg the question, in my mind, whether or not there's a county strategy to create a revolving loan fund using county resources when you're not eligible for state and federal funding to clean up a property. But I do have this is off the top of my head based on the conversation you're having. I do have that question, that lingering question about, is there a legal mechanism to create such a revolving loan fund without having specific properties you'd be addressing?
Supervisor Langenau.
So then in my moment of epiphany here, I would just say that I think it's worthwhile to have this somewhere in the strategic plan. I will add, if it does have that environmental flavor, but then we have to have further discussions at the ERC level because this does not fit with either of the objectives that the ERC is currently pursuing, and we intend on currently pursuing both of the objectives that we have already from the prior plan before the update. So I don't know if ERC is necessarily the best home for it either.
I would say it belongs in 10.8.
Yeah, if I may make a suggestion, I was just looking through, I had that same, I don't know if I'll call what I had an epiphany, but I do like the word. 10.8 talks about the encouraging development and redevelopment of key employment centers in areas that possess strong market potential, provide good transportation access to workers, and promote the efficient movement of goods. It strikes me as a redevelopment function. To your point, Supervisor Langenheim, that isn't under the purview of ERC, but rather the Extension Education Economic Development Committee.
We could give it to HR Finance and Property. They don't have any.
It's actually not a bad idea.
So, like I said, this is a great discussion, but like I said, I think we should keep it like Supervisor Langen said. It's in our comp plan, but it doesn't. We don't feel infrastructure that it falls under our jurisdiction. Like I said, it could be ERC, it could be EEED, it could be HR Finance and Property.
Well, and I also think I think it needs to be modified, because if we can't legally create a loan fund for such, and the only way we're going to receive federal or state funding is property specific, then let's modify it to read so. So I think we got some questions we need to look into some questions first before we decide where it goes, and that is, can we legally create a loan fund? If that's what they desire, then so be it. But then let's put it under the appropriate committee. But if we can't, and we want to identify and assist in getting federal or state funding to clean up specific properties that have been identified that are tax delinquent, let's spell that out and come up with a policy that's developed around that. Vice Chair McKeon.
Thank you. So, but we can agree that it's not going to be a strategy that falls under infrastructure. I want to keep it. It's in the comp plan. But if so,
well, right. I guess I'm not disagreeing. I think it belongs someplace else. But since you deleted it, if it's not going to be picked up by somebody, then it wouldn't. If we don't have the discussion about where it belongs, we're not going to get it there.
well, if I may,
Go ahead.
as Supervisor Dickinson said, it can stay in there. We haven't done anything with it. It can stay in the comp plan and get as much attention as it's getting now. I'm not trying to, I'm just saying, I just want to move on past this. I agree we need to have some type of, and it needs to be rewarded as far as the strategic plan.
Supervisor Robinson.
The HR Finance and Property Committee approach to modification of the strategic plan was to wait for the other committees to act. And in so much as this provision really deals with tax delinquent property, maybe we'll take it up at our next meeting in the context of looking at the language and bringing back a recommendation. The executive committee at a later date can determine which committee it should fall under their purview. But I think that this is really driven by properties like Weisenberger in Marathon City, where it continues to be tax delinquent. There are revenues being derived off the property, but we are funding or supporting the other units of government through paying the tax roll or at the each year. So I think there's that. I think there's every safety. There's health issues associated. There's public safety issues associated with it, and there's financial issues. So anybody could do it. So we'll take a stab at it at the Finance Committee and bring back a language for the committee to figure out who takes the lead.
Thank you for volunteering.
Thank you.
So we will move on. Anything additional? Vice Chair McEwen.
No, thank you. We covered all the areas, and I appreciate the time and good discussion. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to additional committees. We have Health and Human Services. Supervisor Van Cray.
Thank you. I feel like our document looks a little daunting because of all of the different colors, but I will try to make this easy to understand. So everything that is struck out, which is mostly red, are things that we decided to remove from our section. And then the items in green are things that we are adding or revising. And there are a couple items in blue, which I believe administration edited for us to make sense. Is that accurate?
So you're right on. I'll just say it a little bit differently. The items that are redlined, removed, and then added in green were things that were added prior to the committee's most recent meeting. Mm-hmm. The things in blue were things that were changed at that meeting and were captured by administration or certainly by staff. I can't remember if I did it or Laura Scudari did, based on the discussion at that meeting.
Thank you for that clarification. And I want to add that Vice Chair Arstead did a lot of work on our strategic plan, so I want to make sure that she gets credit for the amount of work that she did. The approach that we took is pretty much from the beginning of this term, her and I were taking notes at every meeting, just hearing what people were saying, not necessarily specific to any item on the strategic plan or comments that they were making that maybe could fit in somewhere. And then we asked for our committee members to specifically send us emails of changes or additions they would like to see. So we did get some of those. And then between those two things, her and I sat down and created this document. So we are changing under 3.3, we're just removing the word child, changing it to person, just to be, inclusive of all people of Marathon County, not just children. Strategy A, there was just some phrasing that the committee wished to see differently, so provide resources to reduce childhood trauma instead of developing a plan. We are leaving strategy B and D, and then the strategies that we are removing are ones that were indicated completed by Administrator Leonard's email that he sent us back in July with kind of the update of where we were at. So that is why we were removing strategies, if you see them removed. We would like to add F, which will probably become D in there. Develop a plan to address how to support persons of all ages with disabilities and the changing demographics of persons with disabilities. G, continue work towards reducing truancy. And H, develop policies that support affordable, high-quality childcare. Our outcome measures, we kept the first outcome measure for graduation rates the same, just changing the dates, and then the percentage, editing that to 93% or above. For outcome measure 2 is related to out-of-home care days, which ended up our first edit didn't quite make sense with the language that social services used, so it ends up the final edit being by December 31st, 24, out-of-home care placement days will decrease with an emphasis on reducing the most restrictive and expensive placement types in favor of more family-like placement settings. So our initial edit just said that we wanted to see a reduction of out-of-home placement, but it was brought up that perhaps our intent wasn't made clear that we don't want to see children going to juvie. We want to see children in better out-of-home placement settings or none at all. Outcome measure 3, we removed that outcome measure and replaced it with one regarding childcare. So by December 31st, 24, the capacity to deliver affordable, high-quality childcare to children in Marathon County will increase. So that was everything that we changed or removed for 3.3. So I will welcome any discussion or questions. Go ahead.
Supervisor Robinson, go ahead.
Thank you. As it relates to the recidivism rate, Deputy Administrator Coleman and a number of us attended the Wisconsin Counties Association's DEI training, and Brown County talked about the likelihood that juveniles affected through child protective services would wind up incarcerated or in the criminal justice system as adults was significant, and they were working on developing programs, mentorship programs, and others to address that. And if we want to break the cycle of recidivism, we have recidivism both among individuals, and we have intergenerational recidivism. And I think that there is some strong data that points out that if people engage the criminal justice system as juveniles, or if they engage the Child Protective Services system as juveniles, they are much more likely to be in the criminal justice system as adults. I think that is something that is worthy of our spending some time looking at. I don't have an outcome measurement at this time, but rather than eliminate the juvenile recidivism rate, what I'd like to propose is that we consider looking at the issue of those individuals placed in Child Protective Services and developing programming to ensure that there is not incarceration as an adult, and support services.
Administrator Leonard, please.
To your point, Supervisor Robinson, that was the outcome measure that, I remember having this discussion with the strategic plan and with Vice Chair McEwen several years ago about what are the outcome measures. How we know that we're ensuring that a child makes it to adulthood with health, stability, and growth opportunities. The outcome measure 3 that was previously in your plan was by the end of 2019, implement, or at least one practice change will be implemented that is aimed at decreasing the number of young adults age 17, because that's when you become an adult in the state of Wisconsin in the criminal system, to 21 in the Marathon County Jail who were subject to a court order for services as a child. So we had that conversation. I like to think we were way ahead of Brown County based on what you said, because quite honestly, I saw that as a prosecutor in the DA's office and then handling CHIPS cases. In the span of an 8-year prosecutor career, I prosecuted 3 generations of at least one family. So to your point, we tried to come up with an outcome measure that said, hey, we need to do things to break that cycle. If you want to re-emphasize that, perhaps that's something we can do on an annual basis. I know we do that, but to have it, like I've said previously at some other meetings, when you make it an outcome measure that you're looking for, we will really do it intentionally.
I think in light of the recent discussions, I'd like to keep it as an outcome measure, just to keep it on the table. I think that I learned a lot in that brief presentation and how important it is. I'm not sure that we're completely successful in Marathon County, so I think it is. If we want to break that recidivism cycle, intergenerational recidivism, I think it's important. These are people that are stressed because of activities of their parents, who become stressed in that those adverse childhood experiences impact them as adults, which tends to increase the likelihood that they will engage our criminal justice system. So I think it's important.
The only challenge I would have is, the way that strategy reads currently, it says that by December of 2019, at least one practice change will be implemented. So if one practice has been implemented by 2019, then that strategy is complete. So we need to rework that strategy if we choose to keep that strategy in there to something other than, maybe there's a continued improvement in processes with the intent to deliver what we're talking about.
And if I can add, I think that's what Supervisor Van Cray, I was inartful in how I explained it. The reason it was removed was because it has been done. We did implement at least one change to interrupt that cycle, but what I hear you saying is you'd like to have that be an ongoing, perhaps it's better termed a strategy, that we bring back a plan to undertake those practice changes to interrupt that, what is frequently called the pipeline from the juvenile justice and child protection services to the adult justice system.
I would welcome any wording you would like to put towards that. Okay.
So yeah, I think the point is that it's more of a strategy than an outcome measure. If the outcome measure, that outcome measure has been met, then if we're going to implement a strategy of looking at the practices to help try to interrupt that pipeline, then let's create it as a strategy rather than creating it as an outcome measure. That makes more sense to me. Okay, any other discussion on item 3.3? Supervisor Dickinson, go ahead.
So I struggle with this strategy and particularly what is our responsibility as a government entity to do many of these things that are listed, like reducing truancy or improving graduation rates. They do not seem like things that the county should be focused on to such a level that it makes it part of our strategic plan. We can assist schools in doing so, have a relationship with schools, but elevating it to a point of this focus, and I get it, don't get me wrong, I get it, we want to help kids, right? Everybody wants to help kids. But I'm simply trying to keep it as simple as possible as what is the county's role in doing such things. Similarly so those items, I don't think they should be in here in this strategy at all. Reducing, truancy as it relates to public safety, right? As it relates to conversations with people who are in trouble under the county's care, so to speak. I can understand that discussion. But talking with a school and, kids aren't going to school or kids aren't graduating, that's where I'm going with that, if that makes sense. Just to continue, the idea of childcare, I'm struggling with that as well, and I've spoken about that before. That we have this focus that somehow we are going to improve the childcare situation in the county. Childcare, just like many businesses, is not a government responsibility. It is an industry. It is a business. There are organizations that do that, some for significant profit, some do it. There are many people who help their friends and relatives by taking care of kids. There are many people who choose not to. So I struggle with that whole idea that we are going to develop policies to do such things. Additionally, outcome measure 2 is clearly family keys related in my mind as I see it. I know there's been discussions about that. I've already spoken about that. So I am not in favor of item 2. If you want to reword that so that we can be focused on putting kids in situations where they're cared for, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But the wording of it, in my mind, as I read it, and maybe I'm wrong, seems like a direct kind of attempt to move into that situation. I do believe that many children are helped being away from their family in their situations by going to places like foster care. So if that's the intent in here, I apologize if that's what's meant by that. But in my mind, it seems like a way to introduce that outside of the budget transfer process, but to put it into the budget and make it part of the strategic plan. So really, those are my comments here. They are what they are. I don't suspect that, the full board will go along, but there it is.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Marash.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I have an idea, if you'd like to entertain it, for what was outcome measure 3 that was struck out that you guys have discussed wanting to keep. So what I have is continue efforts to reduce recidivism within the young adult population in our county who were the subject of court-ordered services as a child.
Okay, thank you.
can.
Go ahead.
Just to Supervisor Dickinson's point about the role of the county, I think it's a great point that he brought up, and it was actually discussed at Health and Human Services. Specific to truancy, I think Supervisor Dickinson brought up truancy, the graduation rate, and then outcome measure 2 with the focus on restrictive placements. And just really quickly, as it relates to truancy, county government is mandated under, we are the entity through our district attorney's office and our courts that prosecute both parents for contributing to truancy under Chapter 948 of the statutes, and also for children when they are not attending school. There is a legal process in Marathon County where children can be issued ultimately a citation. Social Services is the department that is tasked with working with those children and those families to essentially get children to school. So we do have a legal mandate with respect to the services we provide there. With respect to schooling, similarly, I think Supervisor Dickinson makes a great point. Certainly, school districts are charged with providing schooling for the vast majority of students who do go through the public school system. However, social services and our criminal justice system in the jail, we are mandated to provide educational resources. So if a child is at Marathon County Secure Detention, we are required by law to ensure that they have access to schooling materials and have the ability to continue their education. Similarly, for those of you on public safety, I know Supervisor Mask, as I'm sure no doubt heard Chief Deputy Billup talk about the services we provide in the jail, and a big one is helping people get their high school equivalency and ensuring that children at secure detention do have access to those materials. So we do have a small role for a small population, again, the population that are in under our care. I think Supervisor Dickinson's point is well taken. Those under our care, we have that obligation. As it relates to the obligation of the county and the restrictiveness of placements, the Families First Preventative Services Act, which is a federal law, requires us, and state law does as well, that the placements we make
Be the least.
be the least restrictive as possible. So, quite honestly, in terms of impact on county staff and what we're going to do, we are required by law already to attempt to limit or decrease the most restrictive and expensive placements. If we have resources in the community to keep a child safe in home, we are required to do that. We're required to safety plan and do those things. If a child, based on the needs that they have and the lack of safety within the home, it's required that a child be placed. We are required to work to keep that placement first with a relative, if possible, and if required to be outside of a relative's care, we, again, are mandated to make those the least restrictive placements possible. So to your point, even if that's not there, we are required to do that.
If I
Supervisor Dickinson.
If
go
I
ahead.
could follow up then. So then if we're already required to do it, and that's what we're, under law, then how are we going to decrease those kinds of placements?
Great
I
question.
mean, we're already, right, we're already supposed to do it. So it means we're doing it. So now how do we do it even more? That would suggest that we're not doing it as we should be doing it. Two other points. As far as the truancy, this talks about reducing truancy. Okay, so what you're doing, again, under the mandate, we're handling the truancy by sending letters and, 10 days and 20 days, all these kinds of things, right? Alerting the parents with the threat of arrest. So how are we going to reduce truancy? I mean, this is talking about policies to reduce it, not actually following just what we're supposed to be doing. So it gets to the point of, there are things, yes, that we're mandated to do, but this is going to the point of reducing and decreasing and extending beyond what we're already supposed to be doing 100%. So I'm a little bit confused.
Great question. So I'll start with probably the easier one for me is the truancy piece, but I'll make sure I try to come back to the restrictive placement piece. So we are the standard practice for truancy. I'll go back 15 years ago. I remember, and I shared this story with Chair Van Cray and the rest of the Health and Human Services Committee. You know, the fact, to your point, Supervisor Dickinson, if a child is not attending school and they're find themselves in the truancy court system in Marathon County, they would be issued the letters. The child would actually be cited, come to court, and the court would order them to go to school and say, you're ordered to go to school, and we're now making these following services available to you, and social services would be involved. And services would be brought to that child based on the court order. The way that a lot of the services are being delivered now, not only in Marathon County, but around the state, there's a push to, rather than wait for court involvement, because court is, there are a lot of negative aspects to court, that you want to bring the services to the child and to the family before you start, whether it's a legal proceeding against a parent or the legal proceeding with respect to the child in school, and also work closely with school districts. So we have in Marathon County, and I shared this at Health and Human Services, we have a group of our social workers in our social services department that work very closely along with our DA's office and our courts to talk about truancy and what we can do differently. And recently, our Criminal Justice Collaborating Council had a presentation from a local school district leader to come in and talk about some of the changes they're making to that process. So that's what we do differently. It's very similar with respect to placement. So the strategy, one of the strategies to reduce out-of-home placements are to really make an effort to safety plan. So for example, if there is a child who is in the home of a parent that is unsafe for a reason that we can keep the child in the home with the placement, but in the home of the parent, excuse me, but also bring additional resources such as speak with a grandparent or another relative who's willing to move into the home with who we deem as a protective adult. Our social services department can safety plan to keep the child safe, but also keep them in the home of the parent, which is in keeping with the idea to reduce childhood trauma as well, because research shows that removing a child from a parent, even a parent who is unsafe, is traumatic. So the better approach for the child is address the safety concern through other means, which is, again, you could come in and safety plan and have a relative move in, but still not traumatize the child by removing them from the home. So that I know I'm probably not being artful in my response, and it's a very narrow one, but there are different strategies we're starting to utilize, and that again is all driven in some form and fashion through the Family First Preventative Services Act that I believe was adopted by the federal government and signed into law in 2018, 2019, something like that. Really to push local governments to be more, the general language is trauma informed.
Okay, other discussions? Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going back to the child care strategy, just a thought. What we did in infrastructure, if it would read assist Marathon County citizens by providing information regarding available high-quality child care within the general area of the county. And the reason I bring that up is that the Workforce Development Board, they actually, and I talked to Administrator Leonard about this, they have a program that they facilitate. The county would not have to do it. They could be referred to this program through the Workforce Development Committee to not only assist them to get more people trained and be licensed, quality, high quality, safe, reliable childcare. I think that would be reasonable, just like we did with the internet. We changed that. We're not paying for people or services, but we did direct them to providers that are in their general area. And like I said, the discussion we had at Workforce Development last week, every county, their representatives, which were from the county boards, every one of them had problem with housing and childcare. And I'm not suggesting that we get involved in childcare business or realtors and get involved in housing, but if there's a service that we could direct these people to that would help them, with the information they're looking at.
Go ahead, Chris, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what you just said, because I think it's a very good point. But I'd also like to suggest that we have an interest in some of these things as one of the larger employers in the county. So it's not necessarily that we are going to go out and do these things, but we do have a lot of people who work for us who would benefit from that. It ties back into workforce recruitment and retention. And so it's still a relevant issue for the county as an entity, even if it doesn't mean that we are out there doing things. And I think your point is really good too about how this is another area where the county's role is not as direct. It's kind of peripheral. Like economic development, we always talk about TIFs and municipalities, but we do have a role in terms of roads and parks and quality of life issues that the county does work on that do help in the arena of economic development. And so I think sometimes it's similar to the outcome measure conversation. I've seen it in other committees too, where we want to read the outcome measure as like a direct outcome from action the county is taking. But sometimes there is that direct outcome, but there's also peripheral things that happen because of something the county did. And so I think that I kind of think of the outcome measures more along the lines of kind of anticipated signs of progress, or renaming them some way so that people don't see them all as being necessarily A leads to B all the time. Like maybe A leads to B, and that outcome is, I kicked the soccer ball, so the ball moved, but I kicked it in the net, so the crowd cheered. So, the outcome measure is you can look at them both ways, right? So you could say, well, we would anticipate that if we kick more balls in the net, more people will cheer, and they'll cheer more loudly. So same kind of idea in that it's not always the direct outcome that we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of peripheral things, like if we're doing things in the court system well in truancy, and if we're having positive interventions in children's lives, then you would anticipate to see reduced truancy, and not necessarily because we're out there wrangling kids directly, but because a lot of the things that we're doing are having peripheral effects beyond just that one action, wherever it's happening.
Supervisor Dickinson.
That'd be my last comment on it. Everything you said is subjective, Chris. Everything that you said is a subjective viewpoint. And then your second comment about the outcomes, we have outcome measures that we are trying to meet. We cannot meet them with this kind of esoteric kind of path to something where we see a number decrease, and then how are we going to ever say we did that? We won't be able to, because it's just going to happen. Suicide, which is one of the other ones that you have listed here later on, suicide is going through the roof. Now, we have a measure in here that in 2 years it's going to decrease. How are we ever going to fully know what action we took actually made that decrease? We're not. But we can, please let me finish. But we can go ahead and we can say to ourselves, hey, the number went down. Well, we did a thing. Well, maybe we didn't. We don't know. When it comes to childcare, where I stand with that is like anything else. We can choose to dip our toe into anything. It could be hospice care. Oh, we're lacking hospice care in the county. Let's dip our toe in and try to take action upon that. Oh, we don't have enough college courses. We don't have enough colleges with an imprint in our county. Hey, let's dip our toe in there. It just so happens right now we're looking at these two items, which really are just popular. As was mentioned, every county is suffering. Throughout the entire country, there is suffering about what? Two things, childcare and housing. And we're trying to then say, well, we need to dip our toe into it to make something happen when we ultimately really can't impact that directly. So the outcome measure that we have, we're never really going to meet, is my point. When it comes to childcare, I'll say this. I have 5 children. We made an active decision in our family to raise them a certain way. Everyone who has children makes the same decision. If you want to find childcare, I'm sorry if it's expensive or whatever, there are options. One is you can create your own. Another is you can find other ways. And it is not to judge anyone, but I'm just making the point. Everyone makes those decisions every day about everything that they do. Are my parents going to live with me when they get sick? That's a question that, so should now the county say, well, we need to do more for that situation? That's where I'm going with my comments about this, about childcare. In my opinion, I believe we're going too far in getting involved in that. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm a little confused with the discussion that's going on right now, primarily because if you look at a number of the other objectives in the strategic plan currently, and even some of the ones that are being proposed in front of us today, a lot of those are subjective as well, though. I mean, even if you look at the ERC, which we'll be bringing back for the executive committee's consideration this coming month, if our discussions finish up, but we talk about promoting sound land use decisions that conserve and preserve natural resources and decisions with economic development and growth. So while there's that guiding language at the end about promoting economic development and growth, that's subjective to every single person that reads that statement. So I guess what I'm a little confused with is that the standard that's being applied here to this particular objective and the outcome measures, if we're going to follow that, then we need to apply it to every single other objective and outcome measure that gets considered. And I think we're going to end up starting to chase the rabbit. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, please.
All right, we'll move on. I have about a half an hour before I have to go pick up my child from childcare. So 3.7, our committee deemed this a priority. It's ensure that every person has local access to effective and mental health treatment. So I don't know how we're showing that in the strategic plan, but that was one of the questions. We think that should be a priority. Our strategies stayed the same. We just edited the outcome measures. Outcome measure 1, we changed the date to 2024 and then clarified emergency detentions meant those 5115s in Marathon County will decrease. Outcome measure 2, by December 31st, 2024, percentage of Life Report community survey respondents who have reported not seeing a mental health provider when needed will be less than 20%, and barriers to mental health care will be reduced. And then we removed 3, and then the last one, 4, it's a little confusing, but the first 4 was the one that I think was initially proposed by our committee, and then the second 4 is the edited one. So by 2024, annual number of deaths by suicide will decrease, and the baseline is the 2021 numbers, which was 21 suicides in the county.
Questions on those? Okay, moving on.
Great, and then 7.2 initially was specific to heroin and methamphetamine epidemics, which I believe was kind of what was happening at the time of this initial strategic plan. So we changed that to drug and alcohol abuse in general, just to be, inclusive of all the different things that are happening with that realm, and allow us, as we're moving in the future, 2 years from now, it could be a completely different drug or alcohol problem in the county. So we just wanted to be broader in that. We removed A, B, and C strategies. We edited D just slightly to add policy and programs, and then include alcohol in that as well, not just limit it to drug use. And then same with E, we added alcohol in there. And then for the one that the strategy that we added, develop a comprehensive approach to address use of drugs and alcohol in the children and young adults of Marathon County, since we've heard over the last few months that that is a concern and an issue in our county. And then our outcome measures stayed the same, just update on those dates.
Okay, questions on strategic plan 7.2? Okay. Moving on. The EEEDC committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that's a lot of E's to spit out at one time. But, okay, on objective 8.7, we did vote on supporting the changes that the infrastructure was a co-leader in it. So we did vote on that. So 8.7, I think, is pretty much taken care of. On 10.6, we are waiting for a discussion from Dale Knapp from the local chamber to speak about workforce and housing issues. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's hard to say. Maybe the committee wants somebody to a little more about the workforce and housing, but we'll see where that goes and see what happens. On 10.8, I'm waiting from a supervisor to arrange an educational presentation to change the notion of the Kolowski interchange and change it to the WASA MPO planning. Now that hopefully will be taken into consideration at our next meeting. On outcome objective 10.10, the three strategies, A, B, and C, we voted to, well, we didn't vote, but there was no discussion for changing the wording. But there was to create an atmosphere to support environmental as a new strategy. We are hoping that I can get more information for this from the committee that brought it forward. Our committee that brought it forward. In outcome measure on 10.10, outcome measure proposed measure 1, proposed changes of the date from December 31st to 2024. And then on outcome measure number 2 is a little unchanged, but I mean, it's proposed to be unchanged, but there was a brief discussion about McDepco rewording this to better reflect and desire the committee's boards to see McDepco lending out money for successful businesses. And then on 10.10, a new outcome, measure 3, proposed changes by December 31st of 2023 to add one or more McDepco information pages to work sections of the Marathon County website. It's just to bring out more view of what McDepco is doing. Get a broader, I guess, people that are looking at it, seeing what McDepco is doing. And trying diligently to get this done, but we'll see how it goes. If you have any questions?
Question. I guess the question I have is, I understand the outcome measure potential. Proposed change to by December 31, 2024, 90% of the businesses that receive assistance from Marathon County Development Corporation be sustained for 3 years. That may have the reversing effect of what it was intended to do. What I mean by that is startup businesses in general have a failure rate, period. And that failure, so if we're going to say that we're targeting only businesses that will be successful in making gap financing loans, and that's what McDevco does, is we potentially are trying, and we will now exclude any potential startups that may be successful, may not be successful, because again, 70% of business startups do not succeed. And so I challenge the committee in looking at that and saying, is that the desire? In other words, we're going to scrutinize the businesses to the point that, again, McDevco provides gap financing. Understanding what gap financing is financing to an entity that can't receive financing someplace else. And so we're going to now make another restrictive potential on the ability to make loans to these businesses, that we're going to only do it where 90% of them are successful for 3 years. I struggle with that one. I understand the intent, I truly do, but I think that measurement is something that may have a reversing effect that may actually limit the ability that McDevco then will now scrutinize businesses to the point that they won't make gap financing to potential businesses that potentially could be successful, simply because statistics work against them. Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I direct this question to Supervisor Seefeld. Was McDevco consulted during the creation of these new outcome measures?
Yes, they were. They were at the meeting, and we did have some discussion with them, and Lance was working with what's Kim from McDepco on some wordings, I guess.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yes, that is correct, and I believe that was the specific measure, because my recollection was there was discussion about what does it mean to be sustained. And I think to your point, Mr. Chair, about the statistics, that's an interesting perhaps incentive that was not understood. That is the current outcome measure in the plan. It's just simply that the recommended change is to extend it from 2022 to 2024, but that I hadn't thought of that issue with 90%, and I'm not sure that Kim has either. The provisions they utilize for the deployment of gap financing are really driven by the loan committee at McDevco, which is made up of representatives of their board. But I think that's a great question that we could pose to Kim, is that has this outcome measure in any way dissuaded the deployment of gap financing from those businesses that might otherwise have received it? That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to.
Other discussion? Okay, I guess we'll look for additional feedback from your committee as it continues down some of those other paths.
The only other thing I was going to add is I know the committee, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Supervisor Seefeld, if you were going to this direction, but the other thing they're going to talk about is not only workforce development with Dale Knapp, and I think the discussion was to also have Dave Ekman from the local chamber come, but to talk about not only workforce development, but how the role of housing falls into that. And the committee did request information from me relative to presentations at the National Association of Counties Conference on housing, and I provided that, I believe it was earlier this week, an email with a series of links and information relative to housing and some initiatives, not only at the national level, but also several that are very local. And in fact, the committee's timing was good. The Wisconsin Counties Association magazine that recently was released had quite a number of articles about both workforce development, but also very specific to housing.
Supervisor Longenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would make a request then for EEDC, and I'm predicting here that they will be bringing this back, that whatever they do decide for this, that it, consult McDevco and make sure that the numbers that are in front of us that ultimately end up in the plan are realistic enough that businesses can succeed, but also balanced so that you can inspire innovation as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other discussion? All right. I think we've gotten some additional feedback on all three of those. Some committees have some additional work. I don't know if the committee is ready to move on any of those, or we could put it off and wait till we have a total rewrite of the comprehensive plan, or the strategic plan from all 6 committees. Supervisor Longenhagen.
Mr. Chair, it would be my preference that we present these to the board as a group.
Okay. All right. So they will be back on the agenda for the executive committee to take up next month, along with the other 3 standing committees that are still out on their stuff. With that, we will move back to the agenda. And the next committee meeting, first, committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. Next executive committee meeting is October 13th at 3 o'clock. And we are down to item number 9. Supervisor Dickinson.
Just one announcement. Tomorrow is U.S. Constitution Day, September 17th. It's a special observance for schools in the state. I don't know if we're doing anything in our buildings or in our county administration, but we take an oath as supervisors to the U.S. Constitution, so I would just remind everyone about that and make it a special day. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we're down to item number 9. Supervisor Longenhagen with a motion, Vice Chair McEwen with a second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, yes.